Hello, I'm Lauren Fates, and the pandemic canceled my pursuit of Jeet Kune Do.
And I'm Jamie Sanchez. I once publicly lost my shit over Cowboy Bebop's Japanese Blu-ray box set.
Are you ready for the beat?
I'm ready for the beat. Welcome, listeners, to episode 5 of the Bebop Beat. This week, we're excited to bring you another live guest, but first, we would like to talk a little bit about what's going on in the anime industry.
What is going on in the anime industry?
Lauren, are you aware that the anime industry is currently valued at $24 billion as of 2019?
No, how is that calculated?
I'm not certain. I guess, like, economics numbers, wild math, like, weird woman who with the blank face and the math symbols floating behind her head. That's me right now. But most recently, Crunchyroll was sold from AT&T and purchased by Sony for $1.2 billion. And despite all this, animators in Japan only still make like $200 a month.
Whoa, that's a real shame. I feel like that tide should have turned at some point. It's a monster industry.
Yeah, and I think about this pretty frequently running Anime Chicago, just the equity between, animators who are doing the work. It is a very low margin, labor intensive business. And the reason this kind of came up in my sphere again this week was because the New York Times published an article about this very big discrepancy in labor not being paid well versus, big corporations like Netflix really raking in the money right now. So I don't know. It just seems to me like, would Cowboy Bebop be the anime it is today if the margins were slimmer? I wonder if it would even gotten a chance at all because it was never really a manga or a light novel before it was an anime.
Well, the margin being what it is probably contributes to it being revisited now, right? That's for sure a cash cow.
Oh, for sure. Yes, definitely. But I guess what I'm saying right now is like, animators, they could really use your support right now. So what's really cool, though, is that there are companies in the anime industry in Japan doing better by their animators. They are paying their animators fair market wages. They're giving them bigger pieces of the pie and really, essentially tutoring them to become more prolific in the industry. Unfortunately, other people don't get that benefit and are often, animators are a dime a dozen and they're scraping by. And man, it bums me out to see a big company like AT&T and Sony just trading around billions and none of that really seemingly go to the original creators.
So how does this news or how do big changes in the industry like this affect your work as a community leader? Like, how does this affect Anime Chicago and how your business operates, or does it?
Well, as a nonprofit, it doesn't really affect us much. Our community members, they're going to be anime fans regardless. The age of streaming really has allowed us to support the work financially instead of going to pirate sites to find things that are a little bit more rare. But I mean, on the whole, a lot of it's Kickstarter. A lot of it's telling people, like, go directly to the Japanese studios' sites and see if you can support them financially there. So it's not being like money passed through distributors or, the producers in the Western market. So I don't know where the discrepancy is. It's just so disheartening, though. But I'm glad that, or at least our members in Anime Chicago have been very receptive to that kind of discrepancy or that gap in wages.
Well, before we get too far into this very important talk about community, I actually think this would be a great time to introduce our new friend. We have a special guest here with us today. We have Marshall, or otherwise known as Marshall Banana, the founder and creator of the Cowboy Bebop subreddit. I'm not going to say lurking there, but mostly lurking there for quite some time, and really was interested in meeting some of the people behind the community. So Marshall, hi, how are you today?
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
We are so happy to have you here to talk about one of the most iconic episodes of Cowboy Bebop ever. We haven't really said it out loud yet, but this is a Ballad of Fallen Angels today.
Good one. I'm honored.
This is an episode of Bebop that really resonates in the fandom to this day, and we thought you'd be a great person to talk to about those people and, you know, how fans of anime and fans of Bebop have maybe changed over time. But before we get into that, what's the name Marshall Banana all about? I think that's a Bebop reference, right?
Yeah, it is. So obviously it's not my real name, but I have gone by Marshall Banana since day one of creating the subreddit because it is a reference to one of the Bebop sessions called Brain Scratch. It's the one where Ed hacks into a website, the Scratch website, and the name she uses is Marshall Banana. So a lot of people miss it, but that's one thing that I caught, and I was like, that would be a cool, like, little Easter eggy kind of name. The really interesting thing about it is, and this is something I didn't realize for a very long time, is the name Marshall Banana is actually a reference to the Heaven's Gate cult from the 90s.
Oh.
Their leader was named Marshall Applewhite, and so if you notice, that episode is a lot like the Heaven's Gate cult. There's a lot of references to it.
That's a really fascinating little tidbit. I didn't think the show creators would have gone that in depth on the Heaven's Gate references.
It's a good episode.
So what is it that you personally love about Cowboy Bebop?
Oh, where to begin? There's so many things. On an objective level, it's a great show because I feel it's probably one of the most potent gateways into anime. It definitely was for me. When I first watched it, I had never seen anime before, and I hadn't even watched any anime after that for a while, but I think probably it's the music, the characters, but mostly the music, I think. And there's no bad episodes. All the characters, I love every single character in the show. I don't know, it's a perfect show, and it's just so much fun to watch. I never watched it a million times. I could rewatch it again. And the other thing, of course, is the community. I think one of the cool things about the Bebop community is it's not very toxic, especially in comparison to other fandoms that are out there. It's actually pretty chill, and I've loved being a part of the community because of that reason.
That's interesting that you mentioned that it's a more chill, relaxed community. I, as an anime community leader, have noticed the trend in certain fandoms, and I would agree with you that Bebop tends to be overall, like, fans are a little bit more level-headed, or it's definitely an older audience. I also think that maybe younger viewers just see themselves as more mature through watching the show, which is kind of interesting to me. But yeah, I would say overall, there are definitely some areas of anime fandom that I want to stay like 11 miles away from.
I think, unfortunately, with the live action show that's coming out, it is getting a little bit into that territory, which is unfortunate. But we don't have to talk about the live action quite yet.
Well, that obviously means people are still super passionate about this series, and whether or not they're communicating about that in a healthy way, it does mean Bebop is just super resilient. Why do you think people still love this in 2021?
Well, to go off of the subreddit, they are still doing fan art. There's still a lot of art out there that people are making. There's a lot of merch out there. But I think mostly it's because the show itself inherently is kind of mysterious. The plot isn't surface level. So there's a lot of room for interpretation. So people are always coming out with new theories, new ideas, new interpretations of the show. And I feel like, there will always be that conversation.
So why did you start a subreddit and after that a Discord? What was going on in the community that made you think, wow, this needs to happen?
Yeah, so I'm one of the original fans of the show when it first came out. on Adult Swim back in 2001. So I've been a fan forever. I'm kind of one of the older generation that you mentioned earlier that is into the show. And I was on Reddit in its like early years, not like early, but like early 2010s. And really what it came down to was I wanted to talk about Cowboy Bebop with people on Reddit, and the subreddit just didn't exist. So I created it. And that was in 2012. And it was just like a side thing I did in my free time. And Reddit got really big, and it got bigger, and the community got really big. And then, years went by, and a couple of years ago, somebody mentioned, like in one of the comment threads on the Reddit, that we should have a Discord server. And I'd never used Discord. I really didn't know what it was. So I just said to him, you want to be the creator of that? Do you want to make the server? So I had that person in the subreddit. He went and made a Discord server. And then a few months later, I joined, and that person is now a mod in the subreddit. And the server is actually my favorite way to communicate with people now about Bebop. I made a lot of great friends there, and it's been a really fun place to talk about the show. And yeah, it's just kind of crazy how it all happened.
Yeah, that's really wild that you bring up that Reddit filled this niche, and that you're an OG fan, because I don't know if you're familiar with what used to be the Bebop boards back in the day, but they didn't quite last into the 2010s, unfortunately. Right. And that was like a vacuum that existed once the boards closed. So it's so cool that you took the initiative to recreate that kind of atmosphere in a different part of the internet.
So what is it like managing a sub? What are some of the things you have to look out for? What are some of the things that make it fun?
Well, it depends on the subreddit. Luckily for me, the Cowboy Bebop subreddit isn't very... it's a 20-year-old show, so there's not a lot going on. So it's pretty easy to manage for right now. So it's chill. It's not that hard. I just kind of go on there every once in a while. I make sure there's no spam posts or people being toxic or inflammatory. Just really keeping an eye on it. But again, the live action coming out, we're planning on making the original Cowboy Bebop subreddit also the hub for the live action. So we're getting a lot more people. We're going to have a lot more discussion threads and posts. So right now it's not too bad, but it's going to get rough. I can see it already.
What do you mean by that, if you're willing to share?
So like I said, like one of the cool things about the subreddit is even now it's still kind of small. I mean, you know some of the posters there. It's a homey little community, but it's going to become a lot bigger, I feel like. And I think we're going to get a lot more people, and there's going to be a lot more posting, a lot more comments, and with a lot more comments comes a lot more debate, some of which is not healthy debate that we have to keep our eye out on. But I'm up for it. I signed up for it. I'm ready to go.
So giving this influx of new traffic to the subreddit and the new Netflix adaptation news, we ourselves are kind of anticipating it, also kind of anxiously. What are your personal hopes or concerns about the new release?
My personal hope is just that it's good. If it's different from the show, I mean, it's going to be different from the show. There's no doubt about that. It's live action. There's going to be a lot of changes. We don't even know if Ed's going to be a character yet. There's been no casting on that. So I'm not looking for a one-to-one remake of Bebop. I'm just looking for a good show that kind of has the same vibe, the same good music. If it's not good, I'm not going to be upset. It's just extra gravy on top of the Bebop that we already have. The original show isn't going anywhere. All it means is more Bebop content, so I'm excited for it. I can't wait. I just hope it's good.
Is there a specific moment or episode that you'd really hope that they do in the new show? Do you really hope they adapt?
So I have two favorite episodes that just stand out more than the rest. Jupiter Jazz 1 and 2, I guess if you count that as one, which I would love to see. I love the atmosphere of Jupiter Jazz. I love some of the new characters that are introduced, and that would be really cool to see in a live action setting. But Toys in the Attic, which is actually one of the least liked shows in my experience. A lot of people just don't get it and they don't understand the point of it, which is weird to me. But I think it's a lot of fun. It's an ode to Alien, and I think that could be a really cool live action episode. Just seeing them all on the ship together and a monster chasing them and stuff like that. That's my personal pick.
Yeah, that episode works as a really good standalone too, and gives people a little bit more breathing room in between all this other action. It's really the only episode with just the crew members and no other.
That's why it's my favorite episode, because it's just the crew and they're interacting with each other, and that's it. It's very isolated. And even for an animated show, you could call it a bottle episode. And I have a thing for bottle episodes, so I mean, maybe that has a factor in it. But anyway.
I would rank that episode kind of high on my list, so I'm surprised that there's so much negativity around it.
Yeah, well, you have taste, so there you go.
Dang, spicy. Well, if we're getting into breaking down episodes, why don't we crack into the one we're here to talk about today? This is Ballad of Fallen Angels. I really love just the fact that this is episode 5. Even though Ed's not on the ship yet, I think it's just a very clean numerology. There's 4 crew members on the ship if you count Ein. We do 4 episodes, and now we really get into this meaty lore of Spike's past. We start painting some meaning into the imagery we see in the Real Folk Blues, and we learn some of the baggage that the crew has brought into this series. So, Jamie, what are some of your just overall high-level reactions to this episode?
Well, first, you get the sense that this is going to be the pace of the show. Every 5 episodes, we're going to get some Spike Spiegel backstory, but that's actually not the case. It's kind of like, nope, this is an insight into all of that, and it's action-packed, it's moody, it's this really, really heavy content about, the Syndicate, Spike's evil past, whatever that is, and really juxtaposed with some great levity in this episode. I found it really interesting, this rewatch, going into it, because we're seeing a lot of visuals. We're seeing new characters for the first time. Annie appears as this, essentially motherly figure or aunt figure to Spike. And you instantly make this connection with her. Same with Mao. Even Mao uttering Spike's name. If Spike were here, you would never have done this. And you get that sense that there's history. There's this real big tension, and they're about to unravel it all. But even by the end of the episode, you don't get any closer to, like, who's Julia? You don't even really know her name at this point of the show. So it's still shrouded in mystery. And I love it, because there's also Faye's introduction here is like a crew member. And like, she's still providing that levity through the episode, even though she knows the stakes are high. So I don't know. I go back and forth between finding this, very John Woo-esque, action-packed, heavy, walk in the rain. But then there's these pinpoint moments where you just gotta chuckle a bit, like Spike pulling a gun from the fridge.
I find it really interesting that you said Spike's evil past, because I don't know if evil's the word I would go for. Definitely Syndicate is doing some dark stuff. It's criminal stuff. But we meet Annie, we meet Mao, Julia's wrapped up in it. This show does a really thorough job humanizing people that are within these criminal systems. Even at the very beginning of this episode, the whole backbone of Ballad of Fallen Angels is built around the Syndicate's changing, and the times are changing. They're not good, but the White Tiger group and the Red Dragons, they're trying to unite. and kind of do a ceasefire because they're realizing nobody's going to survive if we do it pure evil, right? Vicious represents the past and the evil, and Vicious comes in there. He's not ready to change. He's not ready for a new world. He's still stuck back there with Spike. And so the Syndicate, to me, conceptually, and the people in it, I don't know if I'd go with 100% evil. They really set up Vicious and his people as like, that's where the darkness is.
Right. But then you have to ask, why is Vicious the way he is? Who made him that way? And I know fandom sometimes throws around the idea that maybe he's addicted to Red Eye, as we've seen with Asimov in the first episode as a proxy to Vicious, and Katarina as a proxy to Julia. But, I mean, at some point, Spike had to be lacking in empathy so greatly that Julia, this empathetic person, enters his life and fundamentally changes him. And that tells me that he and Vicious had more aligned values, and therefore perhaps they're both a little bit on the evil spectrum.
Well, Julia's wrapped up in this stuff though too. So I don't even think Julia, as much as she's framed by Spike as like the angel who healed him and made him better, she's hanging out in syndicates also.
Everyone sucks.
So, Marshall, obviously, Jamie and I are always going to be a little contentious about this because I love Julia and she loves Swordbois. So, what do you think?
So I guess about this episode in general, this is like, so every episode of Cowboy Bebop arguably is good. At least good. This is the first episode I feel that it really shows its fangs, like what you're in for. It's like the first great episode. For people who stayed with the show up to this point, this is the moment where you realize that this is a show to be reckoned with. Like, there's a lot on the surface here. And throughout the show, the backstory is given to you in little like breadcrumbs here and there. This is probably the first episode where there's a big piece of bread that you can kind of gnaw on a little bit. There's some substance there. There's more clues. It doesn't tell you everything, but it's enough to really start piquing your interest. Personally, I think this is one of the best episodes in regards to music. This is the episode where Greenbird first appears, which is one of the most beautiful compositions like ever, honestly. Especially that moment with the confrontation between Spike and Vicious, and when Spike falls out the window. It's I don't know, it's epic, I guess is the right word for it.
Your analysis of the music is spot on. We not only have Greenbird, but we also have Ave Maria. And, you know, there's a cadence to it. It's almost like watching 3 music videos back to back. And I kind of really like that. I also feel that this episode, there's no wasted scene. Every scene in that episode, it needs to be there for a reason. And it all serves to culminate in, you know, Spike falling out the window. But then they ended on this hilarious note where Faye overwraps Spike and he calls her tone deaf. Still adding to this really goofiness to Spike's life. Like, now he's somehow a comedic joke as opposed to this total badass assassin he used to be.
Musically, I also want to give a shout out to Waltz for Zizy, which is one of my favorite bebop tracks, and it is in this one. It's in the bar behind Spike meeting Annie and being told he's been dead for 3 years. But your point about Faye at the end, even that ties in musically because Faye is humming and it's like, okay, so I'm going to open up a can of worms here.
Please do.
When I was young, I really shipped, even though Julia is my favorite character, I really shipped Spike with Faye. And I thought there was some real powerful shipping fodder when Julia's voice in the past transitions to Faye's voice in the future. Teen Lauren was like, "It's because she's your future, Spike. You're gonna get together. You're my OTP." And I'm going to be watching this time to see if I still ship it, because I can remember where my heart was back then. When Faye, is surprised that Spike's gonna come save her, and Spike's like, no, it's not personal, I'm not coming for you. It does still make her a little bit more tender. I'm gonna be watching.
I think you're valid. I think there's a real sort of Sam and Diane relationship kind of there, from Cheers, how they're kind of at each other. But I don't know, that might be also a little controversial, but at the same time. But I could see that.
I'm here for that analogy. Any Cheers analogy to me is a good analogy in my book.
Are they really rebooting Frasier? Speaking of Cheers, are they really rebooting Frasier?
Oh,
I know this is not
not
a Frasier podcast, but I saw that news.
It is a revival, and it'll be hard to do without Martin. I don't know how that dynamic's going to work. Rumor is that it's going to be a more grittier take on Frasier.
Why?
Really?
The world doesn't need that.
Frasier and Niles Crane are the least gritty characters that have ever been made in television. How could they? Oh no, don't grit that up.
Turns out they were syndicate assassins all along.
I'm actually excited for this now.
That's how they could afford that huge house. All the assassinations.
All the Chihoulis laying around. So, if we're going to be a little vulnerable this episode, throwback to episode 1 in which I confessed my love of Swordbois. I have had since 4 weeks to reconsider why that is, and I have to say there's a level of confidence, an air of confidence that Vicious wields, much like Jin and Samurai Champloo or other, Samurai 7 even-esque characters, where there's this knowledge that they're gonna get what they want. And I love that. I am here for that. Vicious, though, this watch through does appear a little bit more unhinged. He's clearly psychotic. There's clearly something driving his bloodlust, and he's so upset that Spike isn't there as his, number 1 or number 2, whatever that dynamic is. And part of me wonders, if this is really what fans fuels the flames for the Spike Vicious pairings out there in the world, because I will say that's not my slant, but I know it is some people's flavor of fandom.
My watch through this time here in my 30s was the first time I was like, oh, Spike and Vicious, eh? Because Vicious comes across as such an edgelord. So something that doesn't hold up, and I say this lovingly, it's not bad, it's fine, but Vicious's dialogue about, when angels are forced out of heaven, they become devils, and then Spike returns with, I'm just watching a dream I can't wake up from. They just rise to meet each other's energy. Spike is not like that all the time, but the second Vicious is talking to him like that, suddenly he's talking like that. And they're just quoting and verbally playing back and forth. I'll wake you up right now. I wrote in my notes, go to horny jail, because the line, I'll wake you up right now, and then attacking him. Oh no. It's a beast who lost his fangs.
I actually watched the sub last night, and this is kind of really embarrassing for me, but I've only ever watched the dub. I don't know which you guys have watched. Actually, if I might ask, do you prefer dub, sub?
Oh, I'm a dub fan for sure, and this is actually my first sub watch through.
Yep, me too.
I watched them both. But I can't say I prefer one or the other. I have a preference down to each individual voice actor. But the subs translations in that scene specifically were close.
Right. So what I was going to say to your point, when I watched... So I've heard that the sub and the dub are often very different, and sometimes the meaning of some of the dialogue can change depending on the version you watch. But I watched the sub last night, and I can confirm that Vicious is still indeed an edgelord.
Just how I like them. If we're getting into subs and dubs, I wanted to mention Faye's use of comrade. which in the Japanese, they say nakama. And if you're a One Piece fan, you often think of nakama as this phrase that is like a bond among friends that is tighter than family. And I want to say here that that's not always the case. In Bebop's usage, comrades is probably, or like brother in arms, for example, is probably the more comparable translation. I am by no means a Japanese translator, but just from seeing the word nakama come up over and over again, you get the sense that like, oh, this is actually something akin to family. I'm not so sure that's true here.
I think she might be saying that on purpose, but sarcastically, like playing into the idea that ideally that's how close they would be. Nobody thinks they are, but it's almost a joke to say that.
Well, I mean, if it lets her get what she wants by staying on the ship and bumming around and eating all their food, I'm sure she'll say whatever keeps them all together.
Yeah, that's what I got out of it. Another dub-sub difference that, again, is Faye. A very strange moment is that Faye uses an honorific even in the dub. When she goes into the box above the opera and she calls out for Mao, she calls him Mao Taijin. And even in the dub, she says that. And I was trying to figure out why on earth this one time would they keep an honorific in there. And I would love to be corrected on this if I'm wrong, but I think it's because that is a Chinese honorific. It basically is the equivalence to Your Excellency. And so it's not like a Japanese honorific was being used and then got translated out. She was using a Chinese honorific in this one moment, and like they kept it in the translation because it's not part of either of these languages that we're listening to. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of glad they kept it, too, because you get the sense that he is top dog somehow of the syndicate, and that reinforces that entire intention.
Also, the line that she gives, completely just jumping around, that iconic dub line where she says, "Men are such babies." That's not really in the sub. In the sub, she just says specifically one man, she says, he's throwing such a fit. And she doesn't say something about men as a whole. And the dub makes it a comment on the entire gender. Yeah. I like the dub's call there. It's way funnier.
Just while we're on the subject of the sub and dub, it does feel, at least in the episode I watched last night, it feels like a completely different show because you associate the voices with the characters as well. And so the voices are totally different. The dialogue is different. Honestly, like I'm glad I rewatched this with the sub because I completely plan on watching the rest of the show with the sub now because it's going to be kind of like watching the show for the first time again.
Did you feel like your watch through of the sub changed your opinion of Vicious or Julia?
That's an interesting question. I would say it changed the way I looked at the main crew, Jet, Spike, Faye. Vicious and Julia, and it's just in that episode I watched, they felt like Vicious and Julia to me. So I had imagined that would change the more I watched the sub, but in general, that didn't really feel that different. So not yet.
How about you, Lauren?
The only difference that it gave me in terms of Julia and Vicious was I think the sub voice actor, the Japanese voice actor for Vicious, is just playing it a little bit straighter, just a little less unhinged, and that makes him scarier to me. I think the dub voice actor...
He's hamming it up a little bit.
Yeah, I was trying to remember his name. It's Skip Stelrecht, and he is chewing the scenery just a little bit more.
But that's true, too, of, like, English dubs of anime of that era, is give them that gravelly undertone that makes them sound, a little bit more unhinged. But I would agree with you, too, on that assessment. Vicious, playing it more straight, is just, wow. If I could be more into Swordboi, I am now.
It doesn't do it for me.
It's kind of random, but not even just Vicious or the main crew. There's the scene when Faye goes to the opera and she talks to the ticket taker. he sounds like a normal guy in the sub, and he's just got the weirdest, dorkiest voice in the American dub. I just like that's such a random choice. I don't know why that stood out to me.
I could see why that choice was made, though, because I think the dub is really playing into the idea that Faye looks so hot in that scene that it just staggers that guy. And she does. She looks great. There was even, like, maybe too much gratuitous boob bouncing at the end in the church. It was a lot.
There's a really popular GIF that circulates within the Bebop community that's from that episode.
Just that moment, yeah.
Yeah.
We're introduced to Annie this episode, and she says that there are only two people who can call her Anastasia. And the long-lost question is, who is the man next to her in the photo? It's Mao, Annie, and a third person. And I've always read it as maybe this is her deceased husband or some kind of relative. But man, he looks shockingly like Spike, and my headcanon goes places.
Oh, I wonder.
So you think, like, this is her ex, well, not ex necessarily, but, like, deceased spouse, and she married him because he looks like Spike?
No! No, in that Spike is only part of the Red Dragons because maybe he has family ties through Annie. I don't know, there's nothing to back up that evidence.
Oh, you think that's literally Spike?
No, I think that's maybe
she's like his
uncle.
aunt or something.
Yeah,
It's
see. Entirely feasible.
I got the entirely wrong thing about what you were trying to say, but I like that theory.
I've never actually heard that before, that the guy looks like Spike, but I could kind of see it now. See, this is what I'm talking about. We're always finding new things. That's why it's still going.
Speaking of finding new things, I actually never noticed the red eye on the table in the sequences when Spike is falling out the window and he's having flashbacks. There's the red rose, and then there's the red eye on the table, and it's like a half a second, and it just adds so much more context to Vicious, Julia, and Spike's relationship.
Oh, so...
And that, blew my mind when I saw it. I was just like, my jaw dropped.
I never noticed that.
No, I was wondering when you said there's a theory that he's addicted to red eye. I was like, where would people get that? And I guess it's literally just on the tin. There it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's further read into in Jupiter Jazz, given that Vicious is the one dealing red eye in that scene. But yeah, if we were also talking back to the proxies of Asimov in episode 1, the assumption is that, yeah, Vicious is just psychotic from red eye usage. I don't want to speak for everybody here. I'm sure there are plenty of other feasible fan theories out in the world that make way more sense than what I'm saying. But in my headcanon, that is how it lives.
That's a good theory, though. I could see that for sure.
I just get the feeling that if that were truly the intention, they would have drawn it in his eyes somewhere. And he's distinctly does not have like bloodshot eyes or red eyes. He actually, in my opinion, in some scenes is kind of underdrawn. He's just very pale, and there's a lot of detail drawn into his scowling face and the lines around his angry eyes. But I don't see the visual cue in there for the drug use, unless you're just saying it like broke him a long time ago and now it doesn't matter.
I was going to say, I feel like Vicious is probably not his real name. Like, it's probably a name he got because of an innate behavior of himself. Like, maybe he's just always been that sort of person, and that's sort of where he got the nickname from. Unless his real name is Vicious, but who knows?
In the Netflix adaptation, they're leaning into Sid Vicious, which I have opinions about, but they're pretty petty. Yeah.
I
Really?
didn't hear that.
According to comicbook.com, they quote Vicious's full name in the live action to be Sid Vicious.
I don't like it. I'm sorry.
Nope. Thumbs down. Are we sure that's a reliable source, though?
Wait, which website was that?
Were they a source saying there was a husky during Huskygate?
That's fair.
Okay, can we talk about that? Because
We've already talked about it like twice.
Okay,
But please.
so I don't know. So you know who Christopher Yost is? He's one of the writers of the live action. I I've talked to him on Twitter personally. Like I asked him to do an AMA on the Reddit, and he said he would do it once the show was out. But when Huskygate was happening, we were getting non-stop posts and comments in the subreddit about this. So I was like, you know what? I've had enough of this. So I reached out to Christopher Yost on Twitter, and I'm like, just so you know, people are saying this. And that is when he sent out a tweet saying, in all my time working on the Bebop live action, I was always a corgi and always will be. And then I was like, thank you. And I just started throwing that link everywhere I saw it. But that was just such a pain for the mods during that time. And it was literally just one website.
And was it like a week of work? I mean, I remember that going on for quite some time. Months, jeez.
It's still some people believe it.
And it makes me wonder if that's why they shot the corgi trailer featuring
100%. 100% it was why.
It's like, stop your bickering. This is what it is.
And for that, I thank them. Did you guys see the new photo from the set that leaked?
No.
There's a photo, yeah.
Yeah, Jamie, I wasn't clear last episode when I was talking about people commenting on his like suit and things like that, but it was that photo that I was talking about.
Okay.
He's got the suit. It's definitely, I'd say, accurate from what I could tell.
Okay, so I have kind of just a philosophical question about Spike here in this episode. Spike says, "My past is catching up to me." However, Jet is trying to keep him from going after this bounty. Jet knows Mao is dead. There's no money to be had here. You're wasting your time. Spike says, "I owe a debt." He's going to go do it anyway. So this situation that we all find ourselves in, how much of this is Spike's past catching up to him, and how much of it is Spike voluntarily, like masochistically, making his past find him on his own? Because I feel like he could have outrun this a little bit longer, and he chose not to.
I have opinions, but I would love to hear Marshall's first.
Oh boy. The main theme of the show is you can't escape your past, and what we see is various ways of them interacting with that idea. And this episode kind of shows you primarily that Spike just, I don't know, he's just sort of apathetic to the whole thing. He kind of considers himself to be living in a dream, so he doesn't care if he dies or not. And I don't know, what do you guys think?
I would say, given the episode starts with Mao's death, and knowing that it's probably going to be a sore subject to Spike, Spike probably imagines no one can kill Mao but Vicious. This is clearly Vicious's intent to draw Spike out from the shadows. He knows that as soon as Spike sees the bounty, Spike already knows Mao's dead. He knows that this is a trap. He's willing to go into it anyway. And he goes in it with like lots of fervor. He's very angry. It's very clear, though, he wants Jet's help, too, though. He wants him to go to this bounty. They want to catch him together, and he's asking for help, essentially. But instead, we get this petty aggro back and forth between the two of them. I mean, oh, man, Spike is asking for this. He's been gone from the Syndicate for 3 years, dead 3 years, so to speak. And I guess being also a publicly facing bounty hunter chasing high-profile bounties, it wouldn't be too hard to, have Vicious just look him up pretty easily. I imagine there's some kind of license or some garbage out there that, it's pretty clear Spike isn't living a covert life to get away from Vicious.
I think they're just trying to play hard to get with each other. Like, they're playing, like, little games. I don't know. I think Spike knows that, and maybe in a way he was waiting for that moment, and he was ready for it. I don't know.
I do think this episode has started to solidify Jet as adult Lauren's favorite character. We spend so much time in this series not talking about our feelings and concealing our feelings through various things like cooking and bonsai trees and gambling and flying our spaceships around. And Jet is just so emotionally affected by Spike running off. He's clearly worried. He's clearly mad. He's saying things like he can do whatever the hell he wants. And then he butchers his poor little tree. There's just so much heart in Jet. I don't know if you'd call it... Yeah, I don't know if you'd call it a brother relationship, if you'd call it a father-son relationship. But this is the episode where we really start to see how these characters care about one another and what they do with that care. And they're not always the best at nurturing one another or taking each other's feelings into account. And I think that tracks all the way through the last few episodes.
They could all use some communication lessons or
a group therapy session, maybe.
Yeah, family therapy, please.
Yeah. You did remind me of something interesting I noticed. As the fans of the show get older, they sort of change which character they relate with most. The young fans are always, they love Spike. They're obsessed with Spike. Spike's the coolest guy in the world to them. But I can speak for myself in that now that I'm in my 30s, I'm a Jet 100%. And I think a lot of people around the same age, they start to feel the same way, because he cares, he's responsible, he tries to do the right thing. I'd say it's more of a father-son thing between him and Spike personally. Even though what's interesting is Jet's not even that old, unless you count 36 old, which I'm almost 36, and I'm not old, thank you very much.
That's funny you mentioned that, because I've always felt once I'm older than Jet, just put me in the ground.
Same.
Oh man, this episode, I mean it when I said no scene is wasted. Everything that made it into this episode makes it the great episode it is. But we still don't know enough about Julia to get a good sense if she's even worth this effort, right? You get the sense that she somehow defined Spike's life in a meaningful way, and he became this empathetic person due to her intervention at some point. Aside from, helping him when he's bleeding in front of her house and bandaging him up and taking care of him, we don't really get a sense of why she's so beautiful and desirable, aside from just this superficial flashback scene. It's kind of frustrating in a way.
I don't think we ever get that in the whole show.
She ends up serving more a MacGuffin role than anything, and it's Spike's desire for her that makes you fill in all of the holes in Julia as a character. And you can run wild with that. But I'm going to just say right here that all of the Syndicate people suck. Everybody's evil. Good people don't do drugs. They
wow,
don't sell
Jamie.
them.
Jamie, whoa.
Planting my flag here.
I mean, as an extremely politically progressive person who wants to see pretty much anyone on drug charges released from jail.
Hell yeah.
Wow.
No,
Jamie, wow.
Okay. I mean, in a theatrical sense, if someone's a drug user, especially in a Japanese anime, they're meant to be portrayed as, a hardened criminal who's not up to no good, for example. So, you are right, though. That was a loaded statement.
So, speaking of criminals, bounty count, Mao Yenrai is worth 28 million. He's wanted for murdering a rival crime boss, even though he super didn't do it. And we don't get the bounty this episode. And last time was a double, so does that bring us to 6?
It does. And I wouldn't call this one a fuck up. This is by no means a bounty they could have ever caught.
It was a trap. I have a theory that Vicious was the one that put out the bounty so we could get Spike.
Oh, for sure.
Likely.
And dragging that guy's bloody corpse up into a opera box is simultaneously, again, very edgelord and extra, but also terrifying. To make Faye sit next to a dead man, you see her trembling, and there's something really artistically rewarding and compelling about seeing Faye actually kind of break. She can't keep up the facade when they've done this to her. It's very scary.
I appreciate it, too, as a nod to old mafia films. This is really the only chance we get to see how dirty the Syndicate can be, at least through Vicious's intent and his coup. And the fact that his other Syndicate underlings are cool with this entire thing is terrifying.
Yeah, so when you had that opening salvo about the Syndicate being evil, the shootout scene, the church scene, I think actually kind of sides with you, because all of these nameless NPC characters, they're willing to take it to the mat and die in this moment to kill Spike Spiegel. I do want to touch on the setting of the church. Do we feel there is a story reason for it to be a church, or is church because church look dramatic, church look cool?
I think they did it so they could throw him out of a cathedral window.
As good a reason as any.
Because it's very cool.
It's interesting because this episode is mired in symbolism, and the church being like this very Notre Dame imposing figure. They're talking about angels and demons. We also see the Ace of Spades come up, a symbolism of death. And then these shards of glass juxtaposed with the shreds of paper, in that, like, this falling away. I really, really love that scene from both an animation production perspective and just a narrative directorial perspective. I think it's just really well done there. The church also itself is abandoned in an abandoned area of Tharsis on Mars. And so that gives you a little bit more context to the Martian setting, specifically of the city. It's old enough to have abandoned cathedrals just sitting around to be shot up in.
One thing I also love about the scene is it shows how Vicious and Spike are essentially equals, because on the surface it seems that Vicious gets the best of Spike. You know, he throws him out of a window. Spike is surely going to die. But then we see the grenade that Spike left behind. So they're both an equally dire situation throughout that whole scene. And I think that speaks a lot to their previous camaraderie. Like, maybe they just know each other that well to know what they're going to do. So I think subconsciously, like, it shows a lot more about their relationship in this scene. And it's just beautiful.
It also helps solidify that Vicious is the strategist, and he will throw NPCs at the problem before he tackles it himself. And Spike is the blow stuff up dude who really enjoys C4 and being as far and distant as possible to make an opening for himself.
And he probably has something up his sleeve.
For sure.
At this point, I am willing to be sold entirely on our multi-episode question, whether Spike is in control all the time, because we see 2 more instances in this episode in which he totally is. He gets the nudie mags away from the kids, and then he gets a grenade into the church. He really seems to physically know what he's doing most of the time, and when he sort of acts flippant, it's an affront.
It's like he only uses one brain cell when he doesn't care, and then he flips to another mode where he uses his entire brain, like galaxy brain, to hone himself into this martial arts assassin master.
I don't know, I feel like if you want to get the best of Spike, you just have to feed him some magic mushrooms.
I have a bunch of just quick fire observations that I want to fly through. One is that there is a Pepsi can in this episode, but the brand name is
Peep-oo.
Beep-boo.
Is that just Bebop? Is that anything else? I think it's just a copyright thing. I don't think it's anything serious.
I think it's just Bebop. I've only seen it in Bebop.
When Jet is doing his decryption, which is another cool trait we learn about him, he's got a little bit of hacker skills. His login name is Jet Engine.
Also, Ein perks up when he hears the decryption sounds, and I thought that was a nice little detail.
Little data dog thing.
You can also see the broken English in the description of Mao on the screen. If you pause it, I forget exactly what it says, but you can tell that it was poorly translated from Japanese to English. You see that a lot, actually.
In the bounties especially, yeah. My favorite thing that I took note of this time And I would not have taken note of it if my life hadn't just worked out in the order that it worked out. So, okay, my partner had not seen the Bebop movie up until like a month and a half ago. This was extra weird because, as you know, I swiped right on Tinder to meet my partner because they were a Spike Spiegel cosplayer. And I was like, that's my shit. To be dressed as Spike Spiegel as such a core part of your identity that it's on your dating profile, and then I find out you've never seen the movie, unacceptable.
This is actually pretty common. I've noticed this in the server.
This.
I'm not defending it, but it's more common than you think. A lot of people don't even know there's a movie.
Well, then more people need to be brought to the light, is all I'm hearing here. But my point is that movie opens with a scene in which, and we'll do a whole episode on the movie later, we promise, but there is a thug holding an old woman with a gun to her head, and Spike shoots the guy while he has the woman hostage. He's such a good shot that he blasts the guy away from her. He does that in this episode to save Faye. So it is a repeating skill that he has. They focus on his eye, which might actually be his bad eye, and he shoots somebody who is holding somebody else in like immediate point blank danger range. Whether or not that's because he's an awesome shot versus he just doesn't care if the captive dies, that's up for debate. But I love that they do that more than once. I love that they make that something he has in his bag of tricks.
The interesting thing about it in this episode when he does it is it happens when the guy with the gun is in the dark. Like you can see Faye a little bit, her silhouette, but he's in the dark. So I think this kind of shows you that Spike has really good instincts as well. Because in the movie it's in a brightly lit convenience store, but this one I don't know how anyone would be able to be that accurate in the dark.
We haven't even gotten to Spike's eye as a plot point yet in the show. That's next episode, I believe.
They allude to it though.
True, yes. But there may be something more to his eye. Who knows? I would like to think he has maybe an implant, like it's a cyborg implant in some cases. The eye gives him a cutting edge. I think that makes a lot more sense to me canonically, but also I don't believe they ever resolve that.
Do you know which eye it is?
I go back and forth. Sometimes it makes sense that it's the right, given the references visually and when they make reference to it in the episodes. And then sometimes it feels like the left. And I think it's the right.
This is
I can
the
never
thing.
remember.
I don't think anyone actually really knows. Like, people are always going back and forth on this. There are images of Spike where one of his eyes looks different, and then images where the other eye looks different, and some in which his eyes both look the same, and they don't ever explicitly state it. So I don't know if anyone knows.
I could also see that being chalked up as just the work of in-betweeners who are meeting a deadline, or, episode directors who just don't put the time and attention into a minor scene. So that always happens too in anime. I wouldn't read too much into it, but at the same time, the way that they frame it in discussions, it makes me wonder if even the creators don't know.
Right. Also, people are always going to be reading too much into it. That's never going to stop. If they didn't, the subreddit wouldn't exist.
Exactly. So, in more of a lewd note, the nudie mag features Judy, as we saw Bob with in the previous episode.
Oh,
it's the exact same layout. I don't know if they were just lazy and didn't redraw a new nudie mag, but it is definitely the same pose and hair color.
Probably just lazy, honestly.
Judy from Big Shot?
Judy from Big Shot. That was who was featured in episode 4's nudie mag with Bob.
I would be thrilled to not call it laziness at all, but to call it like a bit of lore that she is actually an extremely popular model who many men adore, and it landed her this TV gig. But she's also, sex work is work. She's She's making money elsewhere also, and everyone knows it. I like that.
Production for this episode includes 2 creatives we've already discussed on the show. Toshihiro Kawamoto is Cowboy Bebop's character designer, who also served as animation director for the first episode, Asteroid Blues. We'll see his work later again in episodes such as Jupiter Jazz Part 1, The Real Folk Blues Parts 1 and 2, and the Cowboy Bebop movie. If you like his work, check out his other shows, including Mobile Suit Gundam, Macross Plus, Mob Psycho 100, My Hero Academia, and the anthology Memories, which we discussed last week, for that really strange short Stink Bomb. Scriptwriter Michiko Yokote is back. We mentioned her briefly on Stray Dog Strut, but she's penned 8 episodes total for the show, including Mushroom Samba and Harlock Woman. Her credits are extensive, including anime titles Shirobako, Valkyria Chronicles, and last season's comedy Heaven's Design Team.
Before we go, I want to touch back on just why we brought Marshall here, Marshall's expertise, and we invite you, friend, to share any cool memories or like best moments from the sub, things that are particularly memorable, whether that's a war story or a milestone. I'm sure some of your Redditors and some of your fans are listening. So share. I mean, fans of Bebop, not necessarily fans of you, but maybe fans of you. I don't know. That would be cool.
Yeah.
What are some of those hit moments?
So probably the best moment is also the worst moment for me. It was when we had Steve Bloom come on for an AMA. So a couple years ago, I decided I wanted to reach out to Steve Bloom and everyone in the cast, the American dubbed cast that I could, to do an AMA. And the first one I got was Steve Bloom, and it was crazy. I was blown away that this was actually happening. And I didn't speak to him directly, but I spoke to his assistants, and we got everything set up and scheduled everything. And then on the day of the AMA, the Ask Me Anything, on our subreddit, there was some sort of glitch happening with Reddit where every time he, on his account, posted the AMA, it got removed as spam. Every single time. We had him create multiple accounts, and it just kept happening. There was nothing we could do. And I just remember being on a Discord call with one of the other mods, and I was just like, I can't even tell you how anxious. I was just freaking out. I was like, what do we do? What are we supposed to do? We didn't do it, so we just let him do the AMA, and we, marketed it everywhere we could, and people flocked to it even though it was technically removed. So I reached out to Reddit after that, and I was like, what happened? Please let me know what I can do to make sure this never happens again. And they're like, oh, you don't really need to do anything. It was on our end. We had a mess up. Of all the days and all the AMAs to do this, it had to be on mine when I got Steve Bloom. But
I'm so sorry.
But the AMA went well, and then I let them know ahead of time about the Mary Elizabeth McGlynn AMA, and that went well, and she was great to work with, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, those were definitely some highlights. On the more negative end, there was this, I don't know if I would call it, it was just kind of an annoying thing that happened. Every once in a while, a certain type of post will become popular in the subreddit. It's like someone will post their bell peppers and beef, and then all of a sudden everyone's posting a picture of their bell peppers and beef. By the way, we have a new rule. If you post your bell peppers and beef, there cannot be beef. Otherwise, it will be removed. And that helps keep those down. And we get a lot of people posting their Jerichos, which is the gun that Spike has. And there was this good maybe month or 2 month where everyone was posting their Jerichos. Every other post was a gun post. And I'm not a gun fan, to put it mildly. I think it's cool that people collect memorabilia, that reminds them of the show or whatever. But I didn't like the tenor of a lot of the posts after a while, and we started to get complaints and people saying, we don't want to see guns, da da da. So I made a post and I was like, all right, from here on out, no more gun posts. And then that was it. And then it became this huge mess. People were like, I can't believe you're telling us we can't do this. There's censorship. We want to, it's Jericho. It's related to the show. So I just had to straight up be like, you know what? I'm sorry. I should have asked the community first. If you don't like it, just downvote it. And yeah, and then it all just sort of ended, and then eventually petered out. And we only get maybe like one post a month. But that whole time was just so frustrating because, like I said, every other post was a freaking someone posting their gun. I'm just at a certain point, it's like, okay, they all look the same. Like, what's the point? But anyway.
I could see that being a challenge because there's a sense of camaraderie, especially when you're talking about a niche of gun owners who also like Cowboy Bebop. But at the same time, the message is, okay, and this is true of anybody who's like, look at my gun. Are you then not censoring other people from talking, just kind of being like, hey, I'm not into guns, or like, this is a little excessive. Okay, what's the message you're sending there? And that personally makes me a little anxious, I would say. So, as a community manager, it is important to have those rules in place and really understand like where to draw a line, and like, good on you for making those distinctions. It helps that environment become more inclusive for other voices, where, other times they might feel less welcome or just kind of shut out. So, this is my personal thank you for being a community manager, because it ain't easy.
It's not. And I just try to be what I think other moderators and other communities should be, open, transparent about their policies, let people talk about whatever they want, as long as they're not being toxic or promoting violence and they're staying on topic. Just kind of stay out, keep your personal opinions out of it, and just make sure everyone's behaving. And if you make changes, like I said, be transparent about it. And you see a lot of big communities on Reddit that are mismanaged. Like, a lot of changes get made and people aren't notified and it becomes a mess. And, I'm part of a lot of subreddits where I see that and I'm like, I don't want to be that. But the other thing is, I don't moderate a lot of subreddits. Some of the big mods on Reddit, they moderate dozens, hundreds of subreddits. So they're spread out so thin. And I moderate Cowboy Bebop, Space Dandy, Megalobox, and one or two other things. And it makes it so easy for me to sort of concentrate on those things. So in a sense, I have it lucky that way and I want to keep it that way. But it also, it just makes it easier for me to be the mod that I want to see in the Reddit world.
You raise such an interesting point, and I don't think it's a controversial point, but the idea that the person who creates a space does kind of have the right to make the rules. I give the disclaimer that we do have a guest coming on later in the show to talk about guns. I personally am interested in filling that knowledge gap of mine. I don't know anything about guns, so we will bring that person on and we'll talk about them. But in my own personal experience, I had a somewhat popular geek blog with the Tribune for a long time. And the worst backlash I ever got was when I said I was anti-gun. I had an affiliation with a local wig company that shall not be named, and they broke off their affiliation because I became too controversial because I personally said I had the opinion that I didn't like guns. And so I feel very strongly, not necessarily about guns, period, but about if you create the space, you get to decide what the rules are. And if somebody else wants to put that much energy and labor and time and money and heart into creating a space, they can have their own rules too. And so I think it sounds like you did a really balanced job and a really thoughtful job about dealing with that. I just want to remind people at home that, the person whose Twitter you're talking to, they're allowed to block you, for example. It's their space. Respect other spaces' boundaries.
Yep, tend to your own garden, I like to say.
Well, speaking of spaces, then, if our listeners wanted to find you, engage with you, Marshall, where should they go?
So a good starting place would be the Cowboy Bebop subreddit. It's reddit.com/r/Cowboy Bebop. I also run the Twitter account, which I can't remember the exact name of at the moment. I think it's Reddit, Bebop Reddit. So, at Bebop Reddit. If you reach out to either of those accounts, you can find me. The best way to find me would be the Cowboy Bebop Discord, where I'm very active. I'd also recommend joining because we do a lot of cool stuff. We have yearly rewatches where we all get together and watch the show online. We do trivia all the time, give out prizes for trivia. There's a fanfic contest coming up, a Bebop fanfic contest, which will be a lot of fun. Art contests, all that sort of stuff. So we're always doing stuff. So to find that, just go to the subreddit. It's the top link. It's pinned. Or you can just search for Cowboy Bebop Discord. And then I'll be there. Look up Marshall Banana. That's me.
Well, shit, I'm joining the subreddit now.
You should.
And the Discord.
All right. Is there anything else you would like to shout out? Any other things you're working on or people you promised to say hi to?
No, there's nothing really to plug that I haven't already plugged, but I do just want to say thank you for having me on the show. This was a lot of fun, and I'm super glad that there's finally a Bebop podcast. I mean, I've toyed with the idea for a long time, and I'm just so excited that it's happening, and it definitely looks like it's in good hands. So thank you to both of you.
Oh, thank you.
That's the nicest.
I'm really excited about this fan fiction contest you have going on. I have to admit, I've probably read all the good fan fiction there is out there for Cowboy Bebop, and I mean, some of it doesn't hold water, but I'm all over it anyway.
Our Swordboi versus Sadboi fan fiction can finally come to light. We can finally collaborate and write it.
How did you know my title of my fan fiction? Why would you do this to me?
All right. Thank you for listening to the Bebop Beat. Our next episode is going to be a little bit of an interlude. We talked so much today about all of the great music in Ballad of Fallen Angels. We definitely didn't do its due diligence, so we're taking a break to talk just the music of Bebop. If you have a favorite song from Bebop or have comments about the soundtrack and how it affected you, please contact us on our social media and our email, which we'll tell you about in just a second during the credits. And I just want to let you know we have a new social media rule. If you post bell peppers and beef, and it has beef, you will be banned. See you next week.
Hell yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bebop Beat. If you like our show, please rate us on Apple or wherever you find your podcasts. Find us on Instagram and Twitter at Bebop Beat. Our email address is bebopbeatpodcast@gmail.com.
The Bebop Beat is hosted and produced by Jamie Sanchez and Lauren Fates. Our editor and associate producer is Angela Geis. Our logo and art assets are by Kat Janda.
I was just going to say something that I hope for the live action show more than anything, which I don't think would happen, but I think it would be the coolest thing in the world for them to do would be the three old men, that should be the voice actors.
Oh, I don't think the voice actors are that old though. Wendy Lee looks great.
No, they don't need to be old. I'm not saying, they look great. I'm not saying they're old, but I'm just saying maybe, I don't know, prosthetics or just put them in there somewhere. Give them, make it an Easter egg or something. Put them in there. But I don't think they will be. I asked them in the AMAs and they said they haven't been contacted.
Nerds.
We can still hope.